I'm Brittany, this is Chuaning, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch and read gay things. It's somebody's birthday today. It's somebody's birthday in the chat, as I realize that my camera is not zoomed in the way it should be. Hold, please. Now that's too far. Better. Okay. So sorry about that peek behind the scenes there. Jeez. Naz! It's Naz's birthday! Happy birthday, Naz. Someone else is in here who hadn't been here in a second, although I don't think she can stay for the whole stream. Lee! Lee is also here. Hey. I had things to say before I realized that I betrayed myself with the camera. What were they? We're reading today through, I'm medicated, I promise. We are continuing our read through Erha Volume 8. We are on page 223 for chapter 262, which is called Curtain Call. There's a couple of things that you need to know first. So we read for a couple of hours. We take a break somewhere around halfway through. We usually get through about 40 to 50 pages. There are trigger warnings available down in the description box should you need them. And there is also an evergreen link to the public version of the Gaywatch Discord if you are looking for more queer bookish chats and things of that nature. But what happened last time besides a whole lot of awful? We're currently in the middle of a lot of story time. but then also kind of low-key a trial. I mean, sort of very much a trial, actually, in learning all the details about how Mo Run came to be at Xishang Peak. Because it wasn't by the way that everybody thought he did. There's actually a whole lot of horrific things that we didn't know about that we're now learning. So I believe we've come up to, it should be kind of just before we find out what happened to this shit-stained dude who Mo Run replaced to go to Xishang Peak. And with a chapter title like Curtain Call, I'm not concerned about being lemonade-less again today. The wife and I order groceries on Friday. So basically, so basically it's either Friday or nothing, unless I manage to get to the grocery store for some reason during the week. And I haven't between Tuesday and now. So. Curtain Call, chapter 262. I'm not stressed. Are you stressed? I'm fine. The jail in Shangtan was old and shabby. None of the doors were secure. The next morning, when the guards were busy calling in a prisoner, Mo Run seized his chance and snuck out. The first thing he did upon regaining his freedom was return to the House of Drunken Jade. When he entered the backyard, he saw Anyan standing smugly in its middle, freshly attired in black cultivator's robes. His mistakes had fallen upon the head of that orphan Mo Run, just as they always had in the past. Within a day, he was sure he'd gotten away with it. You are an orphan, after all. No one will mourn your death. I've kept you alive for so many years, it's high time you repaid the favor. This was their justification for sending an innocent young man to the gallows. How pompous. How self-satisfied. Mo Run hung back in the shadows, spying on the carefree and confident Niangongja. Was this how it felt to be loved and cared for? To have a mother's protection, someone to keep you safe even if the sky fell? Mo Run was the only one whose death didn't matter. On one hand, that is what it's like, but on the other hand, it's still not in a way that you would ever want. Ugh. That morning, Mo Run watched Niangongja for a very long time. The boy had already purchased robes and dressed himself up like a cultivator. Once his mother sold the House of Drunken Jade, they would set off for the lower cultivation realm, where he would be a rich young master. He waved a sword around in the yard, surrounded by the same boys who'd framed Mo Run. Great moves, Anyan! You look so good, you'll definitely be a famous swordsman when you go to the lower cultivation realm. I've heard lots about your Uncle Xishang Peak these past few years. You're going to be living the high life. Don't you forget your bros. They can all die in a fire. That's right, another boy added. Anyan, you'd better not forget us. We grew up together, and we've been there for you through thick and thin. Even the death of that little tofu seller's bitch. Even then. Anyan was already putting on airs befitting his new status. He couldn't allow anyone to learn of the rape. He whipped out his sword and pointed it at the speaker's throat. Mo Run killed that tofu seller's girl. We all saw it, snapped Mo Nyan. He defiled her like a rabid beast. How many times do I have to say it before you guys remember? The youth held at sword point shivered. Yes, my memory's bad. I misspoke. Everyone else hastened to soothe Anyan's ruffled feathers. It was all done by Mo Run, a brute in human skin. Yes, raping an innocent girl before killing her. We all saw it. I'll never forget the evil look on his face. They spoke over each other in their haste, adding details to their story. When it came to lies, this was the nature of such people. Repeated 1,000 times, they would begin to feel it was the truth. It's a deeply accurate statement that is being particularly weaponized in my country for the past, just to throw out a random number here, 10 years? The young men grew more and more self-righteous, happily absolving themselves of all responsibility. Anyan burst into laughter, his sword glinting as he slashed wildly at the straw dummies on the field. Once he had struck them all down, he brandished his blade at the straw and cried, "Once I'm a master swordsman, I'll kill all monsters, punishing something." He hated school and often skipped his lessons, so he stuttered, unable to continue. One of his friends came to his rescue. "Punishing evil and upholding righteousness, standing for justice, bringing good to the land, having the world at your feet." Anyan snorted. "You sure know a lot of big words," he said disdainfully. Having missed the mark, the toady lapsed into an embarrassed silence. Anyan waved his sword once again. "It takes power to have everything in the palm of your hand, not a clever tongue." I'm breathing deeply. I can't go on a rant over everything this fucking shit stain says. Otherwise, we're only going to get through like 2 pages. So I am going to be calm and keep reading. Actually, there's probably a game in there somewhere about prodding me, but I only have like a minute or 2 to rant and not 20. I feel like there's a game in there somewhere. "If I ever see a rutting beast like Morun again, I'll cut off his head with my sword. What are you going to do, read poetry at him?" He was still laughing when the crisp sounds of applause drifted into his ears. "Nyangongja, you do look like a young master of Xishang Peak. How impressive." Anyan started and brought the sword up before him, face paling. "Morun!" he cried. A dark cloud rolled by overhead, obscuring the blazing sun and plunging the yard into shadow. That youth in ragged clothes, who had arrived without their notice, looked up from where he stood on the pile of firewood. Despite the gauntness of his face, Morun's features were very fine. His eyes blazed, and lash marks from the whip were still vivid across his face. He hadn't washed since he'd escaped the prison, and blood was caked on his skin. For all that it had Morun's familiar features, Anyan felt this face belonged to a stranger. It was the boy he knew, yet there was something different about him. Morun held a machete in his hand, eyes curved into smiling crescents. There seemed to be something sinister in the depths of his dimples, like the swirl of a gathering storm. His expression was mild, and yet indescribably eerie. "Bringing good to the land, having the world at your feet?" Monyan future master swordsman, young master of Xishang Peak. "Since when have you had such ambitions?" What a joke. His smile widened, features warping. This kitchen boy had been meek and obedient since he was small, always obliging and rarely speaking. Although he'd been away for a single night, he seemed like a moth that had emerged from its cocoon, glittering with life, his grin brash and wild. In the past, the boy seldom smiled. At best, he bent his mouth into a timid curve. But he'd been driven to madness. The youths shrank back in fear. Anyan's hand shook as he clutched the hilt of his sword. He swallowed hard and hollered, "Morun, what do you think you're doing? How dare you escape prison? On behalf of the people and the law, I'll end your worthless life today." "Sure," Morun smiled. "I don't want to live like this anymore. If you're strong enough to take this worthless life of mine, go right ahead. But if you're not..." A metallic glint flickered in his eyes as he leapt forward. With a flash of shadow, his machete struck true. The sword in Anyan's hand clanged to the ground. An instant later, his head dropped next to it, eyes wide and unseeing. Blood sprayed into the air. The headless corpse swayed for a terrible moment before slumping to the ground. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. There was a ringing silence. Blood had splattered over Morun's face. Those tattered rags hung from his form, fluttering in the coppery wind as seaweed sways in water. When he raised his head, the smile on his face broadened. Eyes blood red, he licked the blood from his lips and quietly finished his sentence. Then I'll take your head off instead. The other boys were frozen in fear, unable to make a sound. Morun looked at them with eyes like chips of ice. Aren't you all so powerful? Aren't you all great at passing the blame? All so good with your fists? Punishing evil, upholding righteousness. Go ahead, come at me. Of course they didn't dare to. They stood shaking, scared out of their wits. This was Morun, the same Morun who was so timid and shy he'd bear the greatest suffering in silence. I went on a similar rant recently. I think it was while I was rewatching Stranger Things for Patreon. About, the value of fighting back in the face of bullying, harassment, horrific abuses. Mm-hmm. Morun looked up and sighed. Dragging the machete on the ground behind him, he approached them with slow strides, the point of the blade scrawling a line of blood across the ground. How modest you've all become. He chuckled, blade flashing as the corners of his mouth hooked up. Since you won't make the first move, I have no choice but to do the honors. In the blink of an eye, that yard became a hell on earth, a scene of wanton slaughter. The hall was closed at this early hour, and most of the House of Drunken Jade staff were asleep. After Morun dispatched the boys in the yard, he went to the side rooms and took care of the others, one by one. Some had their throats slit in their sleep, while others woke just to be silenced with a flash of metal. By the time anyone realized what was going on, it was too late. Morun had set the hall ablaze, reducing the House of Drunken Jade to a towering inferno. The songgirls and servants screamed and sobbed, but no one dared run into the flames to save them. By the time he reached the last few victims, Morun was no longer satisfied with dispensing quick deaths. He took his machete to their legs and allowed the fire to claim them. In the sea of flames, he calmly sat down in the middle of the hall and laid the naked blade across his knees, watching those he'd immobilized with a smile. Among their number was Madame Mo, his adoptive mother. Face hidden by smoke, Morun gazed at them, writhing like maggots, convulsing and sobbing in the blaze. He raised the machete again and extended his arm, but not to hack at his victims. He used the sharp tip to pick up a bunch of grapes from a table nearby. Slowly, he plucked the fruit from the stem and peeled them. Then he popped them into his mouth one by one, savoring their sweetness with his cheeks bulging. Oh, these are so good. Morun grinned again. I've never tried grapes from the Western Territories before. All this time you were eating such tasty things. He looked down, chuckling to himself. I'm jealous. One of the beams overhead buckled, crashing down in a cloud of sparks. The dying on the ground screamed pitifully. Only Morun sat with his chin propped in his hand, legs crossed and machete in his arms. He took his time eating those grapes, as if the sky could fall without disturbing his peace. I think someone made a comment during the book chat whose context eluded me in the moment, but now clicks in and makes sense. Do you think that Shimei knew about this somehow, and he found out about it, and he was like, hey, I can't prove it, but if I give him this fucking flower, you think that may have factored in at all? I wish I could remember who made the comment, because somebody connected these dots as I smack something. I wonder. Oh, that was Liv. Of course it was. Hello, where am I? The fire's so big, none of us are getting out of here. Done with the grapes, Morun picked out a peach. Why don't we sit here and have a nice long chat? Who wants to chat with you, you brute, you beast? You're no better than an animal, shrieked Madame Mo. Is this what was supposed to be a murder-suicide situation? No? Morun spat out some grape seeds, grinning. Then let's talk business. Mother said so herself last night. I owe all of you for your companionship and Mother's thoughtful care. Of course I have to do my filial duty and send you on your way. He stood and walked around them, making a polite bow. Don't walk too quickly on the road to the underworld, he said with a smile. Wait for me. As the others sobbed, Madame Mo yelled, Morun, you cur. I never should have let that Shun girl talk me into taking you in. You're a scourge, a curse. You're a depraved beast. And you are not worthy of speaking Shunjiji's name, said Morun flatly. I rushed here from Wubei Temple to fulfill my mom's dying wish and repay Shunjiji's kindness. She knew I'd lost my mother, so she gave you a whole year's earnings to allow me to stay. She was my savior. Savior would be the word of the day. But you? What are you to me? I never should have said yes. Who cares about a year's worth of earnings? You went behind my back and set her free. She was the star of the House of Drunken Jade. Do you have any idea how much money she made us with a single song? But you dared. She was my mom's savior. And mine. She sold her skills and not her body. Yet you took that merchant's bribe and sold her. You forced her to take a client. Tell me, why shouldn't I have let her go? All these years you've hated and tormented me, but I never spoke up or fought back. My mom told me anyone willing to give me food couldn't be truly evil. Morun closed his eyes. So I endured it. I endured everything. How dare you? Ungrateful brat, I'm the one who housed you. I took a beggar like you off the streets. You beast, you bastard, son of a dog bitch mother. In somewhat recent years, by that I mean maybe the last 15-ish years, there's been a general shift in the direction of just because someone provides for you materially, it does not mean that they automatically succeeded as a provider. You know? There has fortunately been a general shift, at least in my country, towards that understanding, although we're still shifting, I believe. I have always known this very personally and viscerally. And so moments like this, very validating for me. What a coincidence. A bastard son of a dog bitch mother. Morun smiled, his face bathed in the amber glow of the firelight. Don't you think your poor dead son will think you're calling for him? Sorry if I hit the mic. Morun stepped forward and grabbed the madam's powdered face. But, Mother, you did remind me. Thank you very much for giving me food to eat and a place to sleep. I'll send you on your way first. You? To lighten the mood, why don't we play a game? What do you think of guessing pictures? Morun asked eagerly. He picked up a bit of wood still smoldering at the end and traced the shape of a sun around the madam's eye. Her flesh burned in the wake of his movements, but her hysterical screams only made Mo-Run smile. Mother, do you know what I'm drawing? If you can't guess it, you lose, and I'll draw something else. That night, he slowly tortured everyone in the building to death. In one blow, he retaliated for a decade of accumulated malice and helplessness, reducing the House of Drunken Jade and its inhabitants to corpses and scorched earth. He lay down in the flames among those twisted bodies, watching as the exquisite building began to crumble. He shoved fruit and sweets into his mouth, smiling all the while. Delicious. He grimaced as tears began to stream down his grinning face. He reached up to cover his eyes, laughing as he cried. Too bad I'll never get to have it again. The ebony tablet inscribed with the House of Drunken Jade's name came crashing down, splintering upon the ground. Smoke billowed into the sky, and the building and all its carved pillars collapsed with a thunderous boom. That hall had seen all there was of song and dance, gauzy skirts and spilled wine. Once it had prospered, its glory endless. Now that majesty was dead and gone, its opulence turned to ash. Those bygone love affairs of men and women went up in smoke with the burning wood beams. Amidst the blazing inferno, the sound of two goddesses in duet seemed to drift from the cracks in the wood and the seams in the roof tiles. Beautiful as a flower in bloom, sang Duan Yihan. All given over to these wretched wastes, cried Shun Fengro. Thus the curtain fell on the tale of a famous Xiangtan pleasure house. Within a sea of roaring flames and the fading strains of song, its storied history of tragedies and triumphs culminated in one last majestic finale. That would be the end of the chapter. They deserved the Carrie treatment. Hell, you love to see a Carrie moment. Because this idea that victims should just endlessly accept abuse and turn the other cheek, so to speak. Because the second you fight back, you're worse than they are. When someone takes that on, as society would want you to do, again, at least my society, then it just results in Carrie. It just results in Mo-Run. People eventually just can't take it anymore, and then they snap, and then you have a bloodbath, and it's like, well, yeah. What'd you expect exactly? Humans can only be pushed so far? Yeah. We're on page 233 for chapter 263, called Return of an Old Dream. Huh. So now we have how the shit stain died and how the place burned down. So then with no one to say any different, then did he just think, hey, I'll go to Xisheng Peak? That's my ticket out of here? Mo-Run's tale came to an end. No one spoke in Loyalty Hall. What was good and what was evil? Who was right and who was wrong? They all had their opinions, but no one could make a definite judgment. I mean, were crimes committed? Yeah. Can we understand how that happened? I mean, it's like I just said. You can understand how a person might snap in that situation. Hell, that's one of the reasons why we have the temporary insanity defense. Mo-Run didn't look at the faces of the Shui family. He lowered his lashes. I thought I would die in that fire. But when I woke up, I was lying in a room at Xisheng Peak with that investigator sitting by my bedside. Oh! No, I think we knew this. My bad. He grabbed me as soon as I woke up and he said I would be the young master of Xisheng Peak from now on. He paused, then laughed softly. Uncle's nephew. The carpets of Loyalty Hall were embroidered with pollia flowers. Mo-Run trained his eyes on their beautiful patterns, his face serene. The investigator didn't want to lose his commission. When Uncle pulled me out of the wreck of the House of Drunken Jade and asked if this was the boy he was looking for, he nodded. That one nod changed my life. That's interesting how it was a moment of someone else's greed that changed his life positively, given what we've seen of greed up until now. But yes, it was intended to be a murder-suicide situation. Master Shuangjing sighed. Amitabha, Moshiju, how could you rest easy? Have you never thought of confessing to Shui Zhenju? Of course I have. When I first woke up, I couldn't bear it. I wanted badly to confess the truth. Mo-Run's gaze was distant, as if looking into the past. But when they heard I was awake, Uncle immediately came to see me, and Auntie made me a bowl of noodles. Something, food as kindness. Nourishing, you might say. There were 3 poached eggs in it, with runny yolks, all covered in meat sauce. She told me she was afraid I'd have trouble keeping it down since I just woke up, and had minced it finely to help. Shui Meng also came by, and brought me a whole box of sweets. His eyes... Pardon me. His eyes drifted shut. I ate that bowl of noodles and those cakes, and I couldn't form the words. They smiled at me and treated me so well. If I had said I was the one who set fire to the House of Drunken Jade, I killed your nephew, your sister-in-law, what then? Mo-Run murmured. I couldn't do it. I swallowed the words down, and as time passed, I could no longer say them at all. Master Shuangjing heaved a sigh. I knew what kind of person Mo-Nyan was, lazy and careless. In the beginning, I didn't know how much Uncle knew of him, so I tried my best to act as his copy. When I realized Uncle didn't know him at all, I stopped doing things as he would. Mo-Run was silent a beat. Ultimately, I owed a blood debt to Mo-Nyan and his family, but I ended up taking advantage of their kin. I don't suppose this knowledge recolors any memories we've seen about the early days of Mo-Run at Xisheng Peak. Of him acting out deliberately? The members of Xisheng Peak were stunned. Many of the disciples and elders who'd known Mo-Run were frozen stiff, their hearts in turmoil. Madame Wang and Shui Jingyang were speechless, staring blankly at Mo-Run's lonely silhouette. They'd watched this boy grow up from a young and immature child to a once-in-a-generation Zongsha. And now he was telling them it'd been a mistake from the very start. Mo-Run wasn't their nephew. They shared no blood. Rather, what lay between them was only death and hatred. What could they say? What could they do? Neither Madame Wang nor Shui Jingyang knew. They'd never met the real Mo-Nyan. They had poured all of their regret and yearning for Shui Jingyang's dead brother into this boy named Mo-Run. Mo-Nyan was a stranger, but they'd patted Mo-Run's head, held Mo-Run's hand, and answered his cries of uncle and auntie. Shui Jingyang had no idea what to think. Mu Yanli shattered the silence. Mo-Run, you may be pitiable, but your crimes are many and cannot be lightly excused. Do you know exactly how many major offenses you've committed? Mo-Run had never liked Tianyin Pavilion. He closed his eyes and said nothing. Mu Yanli shot him a glance, her voice ringing like a bell. Murder, arson, theft of identity. On Mount Jiao, you knew you had Nangong blood, but you looked on, acting in your own interests. At Guyue, you committed a bloody slaughter. All for what? I'll say it once again. I wasn't responsible for the murders at Guyue. The space-time gate has reopened and 2 worlds have commingled. That man was not me. The space-time gate is the first forbidden technique, unused for millennia. Do you not find this excuse ridiculous? Mu Yunli was unmoved. Shocker. Is it not that you are, in truth, dissatisfied? That, as a Nangong descendant, your own ambition drives you to throw both the upper and lower cultivation realms into chaos? Pavilion Master Mu oversteps. Zheng Shi frowned. I don't see how Mo Run has any motive for overturning the cultivation realms. If that was his goal, he could have pulled off any kind of scheme at Mount Jiao. The 10 great sects would have been decimated. None of this is adding up. Before the truth is revealed, please be careful what you say. Mu Yunli cast him a scornful glance. Zhang Zhenmen need not speak on his behalf. Even if he had no intent to overthrow the cultivation world, his past misdeeds are more than sufficient to place him in Tianyin Pavilion's custody. She gestured toward her retinue. Seize Mo Run. Take him away. Wait. Mu Yunli turned to Shui Jingyang. Does Shui Zhenju have something to add? Shui Jingyang looked ill, as if he himself didn't understand why he'd called out to Mu Yunli. After all these years of seeing Mo Run as his own flesh and blood, it had become second nature for him. He couldn't stand by as Tianyin Pavilion dragged him off. But what could he do? Urge them not to. He closed his eyes, teeth chattering. He felt cold, his chest hollowed out, as if something crucial had been carved away. He buried his face in his palms. This man, who had always been bursting with vitality, suddenly looked old and frail. Does Shui Zhenju wish to bid his nephew farewell? These words were cruelly chosen. Shui Jingyang shook harder when she said the word nephew, shuddering like willows in the wind. Shui Jingyang rasped. Mo Run. He didn't know how to address him anymore. It was Mo Run who moved to ease things. Closing his eyes, he stepped toward Shui Jingyang and knelt, kowtowing again and again in the most formal bow. Aren't they just wasting time? Came a murmur. Putting on airs. Mo Run ignored them. When he had completed the bows, he rose and made ready to leave. Yet before he could start forward, Shui Meng rushed back into Loyalty Hall. Black blood dripped from Long Chung as he shouted in horror, What's going on? There's an army of Zhenlong pawns outside. Tons of them are cultivators from Rufeng Sect's Mount Jiao. So are we gonna postpone the hauling off to deal with this problem? Or are we still gonna take Mo Run into custody, try to solve the problem that's gonna kill a bunch of people because we could have released Mo Run instead of taking him into custody, but we won't because justice. Until tons of people are dead and everybody else is about to die and we have no choice. That sounds like something Tianyin Pavilion would do, right? Terror shook them. The crowd rushed out of the hall and saw countless cultivators aloft on their swords outside Xisheng Peak, their robes fluttering in the wind. Half were like the cultivators who had streamed from the rift. I'm beside myself. We already had enough going on, Meat Bun. We didn't... The crowd rushed out of the hall and saw countless cultivators aloft on their swords outside Xisheng Peak, their robes fluttering in the wind. Half were like the cultivators who had streamed from the rift. Rift-ta! She fucks me up. Okay? Wearing those same black robes with masks over their faces, but the others were dressed in crane robes with a ribbon over their eyes. corpses from the hero's tomb of Rufeng sect. What's going on? Didn't Nengongso suppress them? How are they back? Who countered the spell? The answer was self-evident. Who could counter a suppression spell cast by a member of the Nengong family? Furious eyes swung to fasten on Mo Run. Even if he knew who was behind it, there was nothing Mo Run could say in his own defense. Worse still, his spiritual energy was still depleted. He couldn't stop the pawns from attacking. He could only watch as thousands of undead soldiers swarmed toward them. God, that's right! Just as in the previous life, Xisheng Peak would be swept up in a bloody maelstrom. It seemed the surprise Shimei spoke of wasn't over yet. Fight them! Drive them off first! Drive them off! The crowd rushed up to meet them, but they had been caught badly off guard, and there seemed to be no end to the enemy's numbers. Chaos reigned. Mo Run stood before the hall, watching the pawns land. They crossed their swords with the Xisheng Peak disciples and met the other cultivators with spells. Blue robes and silver armor whirled around black cloaks, an impenetrable mass of dark color. He stood on the jade steps, temples throbbing. The sight before him seemed to mirror his past life. Back then, it was he who'd sent an army of pawns, both dead and alive, into Xisheng Peak to kill all who dared stand in his way. He'd grown used to killing without mercy, to slaughtering thousands without a care, and leaving mountains of corpses in his wake. He remembered standing just like this before Loyalty Hall, the traitorous disciple Mo Wei Yu looking down on the charging soldiers and grieving crowd with a smile on his lips, while bodies of Shui Jingyang and Madame Wang lay at his feet. Your blood will pave me a path that begins at Xisheng Peak. His deranged cackling from that bygone lifetime seemed to echo in his ears. Mo Run's eyes twitched. Stop, you can't win, he shouted at Shui Meng. Run, all of you, run! But the din was too great, and Shui Meng was too far away to hear. Mo Run took in the clanging blades and frantic struggles of the cultivators. He saw Jiang Shi fending off a dozen pawns and remembered how the other Jiang Shi had fallen before Mo Run's own blade. You won't kneel? No. You won't accept this venerable one as emperor? No. The blade descended, blood splashing across the ground. They couldn't win. Mo Run watched the leader of Tashui Palace play her ocarina, its sound piercing the skies and sending the pawns swaying. He recalled how this palace master's fingers had been shattered, her tendons snapped. Why resist? As the leader of Tashui Palace, I will not run, even if I cannot ensure its safety. The ocarina had shattered, never to sound again. They couldn't win. In the mayhem, Mo Run looked toward Madame Wang and Shui Jingyang in the distance, fighting together. Yet what he saw was their dead faces, grief and fury frozen in their sightless eyes. They stared at him across lifetimes, hate-filled and accusatory. It was cold. So cold. Mo Run was shivering, his fingertips numb. To think Shimei had gone so far. Shimei had done this. He'd known the threat Shimei made as he'd taken Chu Wanning was not an idle one. It was because of this that he'd so resolutely returned to Xisheng Peak. But now he felt a prickling over his skin. If he'd ignored Shimei's warning and chased him down to save Chu Wanning, what would have happened? The leaders of the cultivation realm were all here. If they died in mysterious circumstances at Xisheng Peak, what would have happened? Shimei's interlocking schemes allowed him no moment of rest. Mo Run looked up and saw a field of Zhenlong pawns, living dead that feared no pain and needed no rest, a writhing, endless mass of bloody corpses and rotting bones. They couldn't go on like this. Shimei said this was a surprise for him, so it must have been set up with specific intent. Since he'd returned here as Shimei wanted, there must be something he could do to stop it. He couldn't let those remembered tragedies play out again. He couldn't see Xisheng Peak destroyed again, couldn't bear watching his aunt and uncle die in front of him again. If the past repeated itself, how could he face himself? How could he face Chu Wanning? Mo Run jolted back to awareness. He shoved his way past the crowd and sprinted toward his aunt and uncle. Stop fighting! Retreat! Get out of here! Stop fighting! There's no way we can win! His voice tore out of his throat. His face was twisted into a mask of desperation. He was a drowning man, struggling for the opposite shore, a dying man, running to those still alive. He was a moth throwing himself toward the flame, one life chasing down the other. Stop fighting! Run away! You can't win! You can't win. I've watched you die once before. Run, I'm begging you. A blade appeared before him, flashing silver as it blocked his path. Mu Yanli's icy visage came into view. Trying to take advantage of the chaos to flee. Step aside, Mo Run shouted. You're a criminal of the cultivation realm. I have every right to... Mu Yanli felt air stirring behind her and turned to see a masked pawn descending on her with sword extended. She met the pawn's blade with her own, face dark with murderous intent. Mo Run, she shouted, so it is you behind this. Her voice was as crisp as a frozen spring, ringing out over the din of the crowd. Many of them turned, watching as the pawn engaged Mu Yanli in bitter combat while ignoring Mo Run entirely. In fact, all of the pawns on Xisheng Peak seemed to take Mo Run for one of their own. They avoided him in their attacks, never touching a single hair on his head. So it is that bastard Mo Run's doing, someone snarled. They're on the same side. Angry faces turned in his direction, ears tuned to those whispers and growls of accusation, eyes red-rimmed with rage fixing upon him. Past and present overlapped. In those hateful eyes, he was once again a murderous monster. He was the emperor who'd trampled all these cultivators underfoot in another lifetime, undefeated in battle, beholden to no principles, scornful and wholly insane. Take him down, someone cried. Don't let him escape. Let's see how long he can keep up this act. His ears rang with those same shouts, filled with the same wrath, castigation, and condemnation. These sights were too familiar. He could almost see his and Chu Waning's decisive battle. Mo Run had used Zhenlong chess pieces to take control of both the living and the dead, along with beasts of both the land and air. His army had spilled onto the peak like ink, their weapons shining like snow upon a high mountain. From his lofty vantage point, he'd lowered his gaze and smiled thinly, watching as the skies flipped and daylight turned to dusk. Then, it was Chu Waning who'd stopped him. Chu Waning, who had given all he had against the tens of thousands of pawns, wielding Tianwen, then Zhuge, then, finally, Huaisha. That comes with a footnote. Tianwen, Zhuge, and Huaisha take their names from poems and verses of Chu, written by the poet and statesman Chu Yuan during the Warring States period. The poem Huaisha expresses grief, idealistic resolve, and acceptance of death. It is commonly interpreted as Chu Yuan's suicide note. Its title, which means embracing sand, is thought to be a reference to Chu Yuan's chosen means of death. Exiled and distraught over the fall of his state's capital, he drowned himself in the Milo River by clutching a stone to his chest. That might be the rudest footnote so far. It is then, therefore, no mistake that the sentence reads, wielding Tianwen, then Zhuge, and then finally, Huaisha. Last resort, Huaisha. Huaisha. Mo Run would never forget the grief and agony in Chu Waning's eyes as he summoned his longsword. I heard this is the blade Shizun uses to kill. It seems today I finally get to see it. Mo Run, Chu Waning had said. What will it take for you to stop? Mo Run had thrown his head back and laughed. I can't, Shizun. My hands are covered in blood. I killed aunt and uncle. I killed my own sect siblings. Now I only have to take your head and I'll be the ultimate tyrant. No one will be able to stand in my way. Chu Waning looked like he had been run through. Yet Mo Run remained unsatisfied. A malicious impulse beat in his heart. Once I kill you, he bit out, each syllable crushed between his teeth. There will be no one on earth I cannot kill. That's the end of the chapter. We're coming up on the midpoint, so we're going to go ahead and take our break to breathe. And, I don't know, maybe pace around the house. We'll be on page 243 for chapter 264, which is called The Emperor Alike. Fantastic fucking stuff happening. Extremely well written. I'm so fucking tense, I think I'm about to snap my own neck. So I'll be back in a few minutes. Please enjoy the Gaywatch break room. And like the stream if you're having a time. That'd be great. And I'll see you on the other side of the war and the break. And welcome back. We are all going to die. We're on page 243 for chapter 264, which is called The Emperor Alike. Are we less tense? No? Great. At last, master and disciple turned upon each other. It was a battle for the ages, but in the end, Chu Waning's fragile core was no match for Mo Run's raw and youthful strength. Stop struggling. The young fiend had grown increasingly formidable as they fought. He leered behind his blade as Bugui and Huaisha met and flashed. Huaisha's golden glow flickered and dimmed, while Bugui's green flames filled the eyes of teacher and student. Mo Run took in the sight of Chu Waning's bloodless face, then flicked a glance at Huaisha's fading light. Derision rose in his gaze. You're out of spiritual energy. If you keep going, your core will shatter. You'd rather die than become a commoner. Am I right? Chu Waning clenched his jaw and said nothing, his lips devoid of color. When Huaisha went completely dark, Mo Run knew Chu Waning was well and truly spent. He burst into wild laughter. What else can you use against me? You hung of the night sky, my most high and lofty Shizin. Chu Waning fell to one knee, bracing himself with his sword to keep from collapsing. His white robes splattered with blood. He looked up. Back then, Mo Run had been so full of spite that all he saw was the determination in Chu Waning's eyes and not the sorrow buried beneath. Many years later, when Taishun Jun swallowed the poison that would end his life, his mind had drifted back to that defining battle. Chu Waning had truly been willing to die just to stop him. Putting the people before the self. He'd derided Chu Waning as a coward who spoke in empty platitudes, but Chu Waning was indeed a man of his word. Choose compassion, his Shizin said. Don't hold on to hatred. A flash of gold. Mo Run saw that final serenity in Chu Waning's eyes an instant before a brilliant light rose from Chu Waning's palms. This was how the Beidou immortal, a man with no friends or family in the cultivation world, sacrificed his spiritual core to summon his three holy weapons once more. Zhuge, Tianwen, Huaisha. Was there no end to Chu Waning's prideful stubbornness? Mo Run's massive army fell before the bright power of Chu Waning's spiritual core. In the light of those holy weapons, those black and white chess pieces had crumbled to dust. It was funny. Mo Run had been standing right in front of Chu Waning, inches away. He had seen this desperate man, nearly delirious with blood loss, and did nothing. He had only watched, mildly surprised and a little curious. He wanted to know how far this callous man would go for the sake of the people to whom he so often spoke. He watched as Chu Waning spent the very last of his spiritual energy. The roaring river quieted, the crows blocking the sun scattered. The living who had been made puppets regained their minds, and the dead closed their eyes and returned to their eternal sleep. Mo Run watched as the Beidou immortal's core splintered, watched as the golden glow of it faded, watched as his Shizun sank to his knees before him and collapsed in the dust. Throughout it all, Mo Run's face was impassive. He seemed to hear his mother's dying words in his ears, the sound of that kind-hearted woman stroking his cheek and telling him to repay others for their kindness instead of seeking them out for revenge. Despite the years that had gone by, here again were those same familiar exhortations. Before Chu Waning sacrificed his core, he'd said, "Choose compassion. Don't hold on to hatred." But Mo Run had failed. His heart held endless loathing. Only spilling blood gave him a moment's respite. And why do we think that was? Why do we think that was? Did it have something to do with a flower planted in your fucking chest by some fuck-ass water bitch in order to manipulate you into ruining an entire planet for reasons that we're still not entirely sure of yet, but we at least have a couple of inclinations. Hindsight is helpful in this moment, is all I'm saying. He destroyed Xisheng Peak, slaughtered Rufeng sect, killed his aunt and uncle along with thousands of cultivators and dozens of sect leaders. He dyed the world red and built mountains of white bone until the very end, when he was surrounded at Wushan Palace and took his own life before the tower. He'd lived through all of it himself. Those colossal crimes had been the work of his own hands. He was the perpetrator of those atrocities. Bugui had soaked in the blood of hundreds, and the Zhenlong chess formation had taken tens of thousands of lives. It was all him. Sort of, with an asterisk. Mo Run's vision went dark. He could scarcely breathe. A nearby groan yanked him back to his senses and out of the mire of memory. Mu Yanli had been stabbed in the shoulder, and her blood was hot on his face. Pavilion Master, watch out! Members of Tianyin Pavilion rushed up to protect Mu Yanli, who panted but gritted out, I'm fine. The pawn in front of her flourished its blade. Before all those watching eyes, he knelt to greet Mo Run. Bowing his masked face, he said, This subordinate deserves to be punished for failing to rescue Master. Gasps of shock raced through the crowd. None of them were mine. Mo Run's the one controlling them. It called him Master. No, said Mo Run, no. But who believed that? Who would believe him? Shaking his head, Mo Run took a step back. He was surrounded by those suspicious and hateful faces. No. He turned to look for Shui Meng, but Shui Meng was too far away. He hadn't seen anything that had happened. He looked to Madame Wang and Shui Jingyang. Those two had indeed witnessed it, and their expressions were awful to behold. Mo Run's mouth trembled. He wanted to speak, but didn't know what he could say in his defense, because he doesn't know anything. Chu Wanning is the one who knows just everything. Chu Wanning knows everything. He's not here right now, so Mo Run just gets to sit here and A group of pawns surged out from behind Madame Wang. Auntie, look out! At his shout, the crowd turned. Shui Jingyang sprang toward her immediately, but he was surrounded by pawns himself. He couldn't get to Madame Wang. Auntie! Mom! There was a shrill metallic clang. It was Jiang Shi who had leapt from the crowd, Shui Huang in hand, to beat back the pawns surrounding Madame Wang. Shidi, she said in shock. Jiang Shi shot her a freezing look. Use your eyes. I don't care, he's still a hero. Master Xuanjing was squinting at a storm cloud on the horizon, its dark mass pressing closer and closer to Xisheng Peak. When he finally made out what it was, he dared not believe his own eyes. It wasn't until others began to turn toward that roiling black cloud that he cried, mustache quivering, How could this be? How many pawns are there? The black chess pieces surged forward like the tide, an unending mass. Some were dead, some were alive, but all bore faces burned beyond recognition, mouths gaping and tongues torn out. They would never speak again, even if they got their minds back. Behind them were beasts controlled by the Zhenlong formation, from dogs to snakes. Sorry, just dogs have become a loaded thing. Snakes have become a loaded thing. So you kind of pay attention to when they come up. Mo Yu, Mo, run! As the crowd turned to face him once more, fear outweighed their fury. Those who had been pressing in on him took several steps back. Insane! Mo Run, are you insane? How many chess pieces did you make? Mo Run opened his mouth. He wanted to say, no, it wasn't me. But who else could it be? The space-time gate of life and death had opened again, and Taishan had led his army of thousands back into this world. What was the difference between the two of them? They had the same memories and used the same spells. Mo Zongsha was just as skilled as Taishan at the Jianlong chess formation, and without any special commands, the pawns made by Taishan would also acknowledge Mo Zongsha as their master. The slaughter of kin and the razing of cities, the use of forbidden techniques, and the creation of thousands of enthralled soldiers, destroying the world and reducing all to naught. It was all his doing. All the blame fell squarely on his shoulders. She does this on purpose, and I fucking hate her. More pawns swarmed toward them, with no end in sight. They fanned out like ink on paper, drawing inexorably closer. What do we do? Someone cried, panicked. Mo Run, Mu Yunli snarled. What do you have to say for yourself? You planned this. I only wish Tianyun Pavilion had learned of this sooner so we could have had you executed. Black clouds obscured the sun, blanketing the world in darkness. A bloody wind whistled through the mountain peaks. The horde of undead pawns was like a massive bell hanging high in the air, ready to come crashing down at any moment, to crush humans like ants and splinter the world itself. Mo Run's pupils shrank as he turned his face up to the sky. The cultivators refused to give up. Some soared into the air on their swords to meet the enemy, while others stood their ground below. The clash this time was more intense, the air clotted with blood and screams. Heads rolled and intestines spilled into the dirt, but that black tide poured out from the horizon, on, striking fear into the hearts of all who stood against it. Dad! Mom! Shui Meng's shout came from a distance. Mo Run whipped around. Shui Jingyong and Jiang Shi were both covered in blood. There was too much of that furious crimson. It was impossible to tell whether it had come from themselves or their slain enemies. Shui Meng struggled mightily to make his way toward his parents, slashing a path through the undead with his scimitar, but he was one against so many. Shui Meng! Mo Run started toward him, but Shui Meng looked away, conflicted. Shui Meng was trying to avoid him. One of the Rufeng sect revenants sprang at Shui Meng, sinking their sword into Shui Meng's shoulder. Blood streamed from the wound, dyeing his silver armor scarlet. Shui Meng! Shui Meng! Mo Run scrambled desperately toward him, but there were so many people between them, and Shui Meng was so far away. He couldn't get there in time. Now that Shui Meng was injured, more chess pieces charged at him. His silhouette was swiftly swallowed up by the mindless Zhenlong puppets. Meng Er! Meng Er! Hysterical screams tore from Madame Wang and Shui Jingyong's throats. Mo Run had never heard them shriek so miserably. His scalp prickled with foreboding. Shui Meng. No, it wasn't supposed to be like this. There had to be a way. There had to be a way. Hua Binan wouldn't have sent Mo Run to Xisheng Peak, setting up such a complicated scenario merely to force him to watch as the sect was destroyed. What did Hua Binan wish him to do? What was it? What did Hua Binan want? What was this surprise meant to accomplish? What would bring an end to it? What would it take for him to be spared? Realization broke over him. Mo Run froze, heart pounding. He finally understood. Hua Binan's ruthlessness, his insistence on ruining Mo Run's reputation and pushing him into a corner. Mo Run knew why he'd done it. Nangongse had made the choice at Mount Jiao, and Chu Wanning had made it in that decisive battle in the past life. He had no spiritual energy left, but he did have his core. He could feel that light glowing in his chest, pulsing alongside his heart. Taishanjun's crazed smile surfaced in his mind. You're out of spiritual energy. If you keep going, your core will shatter. We both know how much you value your pride, Shizun. I think you'd rather die than become a commoner. Am I right? Mo-Run knew what he had to do. Tears sprang to his eyes. Wrapped in the chaos of battle, Mo-Run felt suddenly calm. In the past life, Chu Wanning had sacrificed himself, proving that putting the people before the self was not an empty phrase. Mo-Run seemed to once again glimpse Chu Wanning's pallid face in the instant before he'd shattered his own core. When his Shizun thought he would die, his final words to Mo-Run were, "Choose compassion. Don't hold on to hatred." There was a rumbling boom, shaking the earth under the cultivator's feet. What happened? What's going on? Everyone was stunned, dodging pawns as they looked for the source of the sound. They didn't have to look for long. Where Mo-Run had been standing, a blazing light shone. Not real flames, but the roaring conflagration of spiritual energy that appeared when a fire-type core burned itself out. Mo-Run was enveloped in their light. Mo-Wei-Yu, Emperor Taishanjun of the past, the once-in-a-generation Zongsha of the present. To bring an end to the calamity unfolding before his eyes, he detonated his own spiritual core. Just as it had with Nangongsa and Chu Wanning, the shattering gave Mo-Run the greatest spiritual energy he'd ever wielded. His eyes were dyed scarlet by the flames, but there was no pain on his handsome face. Who was he in this moment? Could he cease to be the reviled Taishanjun? If he could, then he too wanted to be Chu Wanning. Within his chest, his core splintered and melted away. The flames burned brighter, blazing past the clouds and illuminating the heavens themselves. In that moment, he sensed that clean and bright dream of his youth fluttering back into his heart. He saw Duan Yihan and Chu Wanning. He saw his mother stroking his cheek in the woodshed, saying, "Only repay kindness. Don't seek revenge." He saw that youth outside Wu Bei Temple, carefully feeding him porridge from his cupped hand. "Slow down. There's more if you want it." In both of his lives, he'd wanted to be good. He'd failed to do so in the past life, and in this one, he'd grieved the events of that life for close to 10 years. How could he make up for it? He was tortured with yearning, day and night, but he didn't know how. If he were to say he'd once dreamed of saving the common people, who would believe him? He'd be mocked, berated, and derided. He was Mo-Wei-Yu. He was Emperor Taishanjun. He'd made mistakes, and he'd killed. Anything he did in recompense was useless and wrong. No one would forgive him. Perhaps it was only in this fire, as his core shattered, as he sacrificed himself for that dream, as he took the same step Chu Wanning had taken in the past life, that he might gain the slightest reprieve. Only then might he have the right to cautiously say, "If I could, I too would want to be Chu Wanning." Please don't laugh at this wish of mine. Don't make fun of me. I know I'm dumb. For a long time, I had no one by my side. That's how I lived for 2 lifetimes, walking the wrong path for 20 years. I'm so dumb. I don't know how I ended up in this hopeless darkness. I don't know how it came to this. When I think back on it, everything was a mistake. I can no longer find Mom or Shizin. Please. Hell is too cold. Let me go back, won't you? I want to go home. That was the end of that chapter. We are on page whatever the fuck. We are on page 253 for chapter 265, which, since I just showed you the art, you've seen the title of this chapter. It's called Shimei Mirrored. Because why not? I'm just gonna, just 1 second. That was a rare moment where I was like, in my head, back of my head, as it was happening, I was like, listen, I'm reading in front of people, and I therefore need to, articulate words. And this was one of those moments where if I start to get emotional, I'm going to be inconsolable and unable to speak. Because that's what happens when I get emotional. My throat closes. So that is the only reason why I actually made it through. And I'm holding it together by about this much. So, I fucking hate her. And we're on chapter 265. Sorry, I read the first line and I had to violently suppress the urge to take an actual bite out of the microphone and rip it off the boom arm that it's currently sitting on. That would be an awful shame. This mic was an extremely generous gift. When a candle burned out, only darkness lingered. When a fire went out, only ashes remained. Yet even darkness was once bright, and even ashes were once warm. Mo Run too had once had days of light and warmth. But no one would know, and no one would care. Before we got to the fucking evisceratingly heartbreaking part of that short paragraph, that it was one of the greatest things that I had ever read, and I'm writing that down for future reference. Thank you. He had spent his last sparks of spiritual energy. He watched as the birds scattered and the undead soldiers crumpled, watched as the living regained their senses and the pawns fell apart. He saw the black tide about to swallow Xisheng Peak retreating, and watched as the apocalypse was averted. All of them thought him a despicable criminal, and he didn't disagree. But the demon had finally done something worthy of a god. Chu Wanning was his candle, and he had clumsily followed his light. You have got to be joking. Also making a note here. Lemonade. Gah! Run air! Fuzzily, he heard people calling his name. He saw Shui Meng stumbling forward out of the corner of his eye, saw Shui Jingyong and Madame Wang breaking through the crowd and running toward him. Their voices brought him profound relief. He showed his teeth, attempting to smile, but tears streaked down his blood-stained face. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry, it's all my fault," but his throat was choked with sobs. And he could only plead, "Don't hate me." This would be in his head. Next. I really, really loved all of you. I loved Auntie and Uncle, loved Xisheng Peak, loved this stolen warmth and stolen family. Auntie, Uncle, Shui Meng. Please don't hate me. That dread army was beaten back. Mo Run collapsed into the dirt. When Chu Wanning had fainted from his wounds in the past life, his white robes had been stained with blood, but he had still seemed pristine. He and Mo Run were not the same. Mo Run had always been caked in filth. In the moment before he lost consciousness, Mo Run felt Madame Wang's soft embrace. "Run air," she cried, voice cracking with heartbreak. He heard Shui Jingyong confronting Mu Yunli. "A plot!" he was shouting. "What plot? If he summoned these chess pieces, why would he go so far to save us?" He heard Shui Meng howling, "Don't touch him! Don't touch him! Don't take him away!" Everything was a mess. Mo Run wanted to explain. He had more to say. But he was so very, very tired. He closed his eyes. It's a scene break. Obviously devastating when Madame Wang and Shui Jingyong are invested and protective of Mo Run. But if she's going to keep including Shui Meng's very clear devotion, love, and care for Mo Run, I'm not going to make it. In Mount Zhao's Hall of Sages, the ever-bright lamps glowed steadily. The whale oil candles were as thick and stout as bowls. Here there was no light from the stars or sun. Only the candles weeping their waxen tears tracked the passage of time. Chimay sat on the dais in a cloak of white fox fur. His forehead rested in his hand, eyes closed in meditative repose. This had been Xu Shuanglin's preferred seat. Chimay had watched as Xu Shuanglin refined his Zhenlong chess pieces and created... I'm so sorry and beside myself that it took me a couple seconds to realize what we're doing in this scene. Gotcha. I'm here now. Chimay had watched as Xu Shuanglin refined his Zhenlong chess pieces and created heaven and hell, wishing wholeheartedly to bring his Shizun back to life. He'd found Xu Shuanglin terribly interesting. It was a shame he couldn't keep him around in the end. Before Chimay lay an enspelled silk scroll, covered in flaring words and all manner of colored dots. This was the sand table Taishanjun had created for the Zhenlong chess formation. Each black dot represented a black Zhenlong chess piece, silver connoted white pieces, and red the discarded pawns. The small squares scattered over the scroll represented their enemies. With this sand table before him, he had a clear view of the battle no matter where he was. Chimay had unrolled the scroll upon the table, but only glanced at it. He'd only set it up out of idle curiosity. He knew precisely what Mo Run would choose. Taishanjun would have had countless paths out of the snare, but Mo Zhongshe had only one. There was nothing much to observe. Something, immorality has tons of choices, but morality has very few. After a while, the doors of the hall opened. Soft footsteps rustled through the room. Chimay didn't look up. "You're here?" A man's feet came to a stop upon the well-lit brick floor. He wore a snow-white cloak, the edge of his hood pulled low to shadow his face. He stood in the center of the hall with perfect poise. When he spoke, his voice was low but clear. "I just got word that Mo Run shattered all of the pawns Taishanjun created." Chimay's eyelashes didn't so much as flutter. He said peaceably. It's not like he had much of a choice. Now I'm concerned. Who the fuck is this? Taishanjun's body is falling apart. Those chess pieces he made started draining your spiritual energy ages ago. Now that Mo Run's used his core to break them, you'll be free of them as well. This is a good thing. Oh, Chimay smiled. Are you worried about me? The man in white didn't answer. After a long beat, he asked, "What will you do next?" "The plan hasn't changed." Chimay stirred at last. Stretching, he blinked open those peach blossom eyes, and the whole room brightened with his smile. "Haven't we gone over this?" "I know you've planned it out, but you must think this through. Mo Run paid a heavy price to stop those Zhenlong pawns. These cultivators aren't idiots. There's no way they won't become suspicious." Chimay smiled. "I know what you mean. Averting a terrible disaster for the cultivation world by shattering his own core. What a hero." "Do you think the cultivation realm will interrogate their heroes?" Chimay didn't answer right away. Still smiling, he wove his slender fingers together and propped his chin on top. "Don't you think Mo Run's choice resembles Chu Wanling's actions in the past life?" he said sweetly. The man in white was quiet a moment. "Yes, a direct reenactment, more or less." "Then let me ask you this. When Chu Wanling was taken prisoner by Taishanjun, how many people from the cultivation world cared? How many remembered him?" Silence. The smile on Shimei's face grew more radiant still. Barely anyone, wasn't it? I've told you before, Shuimeng went everywhere seeking aid. In the beginning, there were people who shed a tear or two and promised to help him storm Xisheng Peak in a rescue mission. But what then? All those promises were empty air in the face of Taishanjun's might. As time passed, as those feelings faded, those same people began to find Shuimeng irritating. When he next came begging, they changed their tune. How long has Chu Wanning been there? They asked. Who knows if he's still alive? Is it worth sacrificing people's lives for a man who might very well be dead? The man in white shook his head. No one knew what had happened to Chu Wanning. Mo Run is right there in their midst, alive and well. Whatever their capacity for cruelty, they won't harm someone who just bled for the cultivation realm. Shimei couldn't help a sigh. Oh, you're still young, still naive. He rolled up the scroll on the table. The pawn markings had all turned red. Out of commission. Unbothered, he stuffed it back into his Changkun pouch. Everyone's noble when it doesn't touch their own interests. Their true nature emerges when it's their turn to suffer. His slender fingers knotted the string of the Changkun pouch. To them, he said as he looked up, Mo Run might be an innocent man framed, or he might be a duplicitous villain. It'd be a shame to harm an innocent man, of course, but sparing a villain would bring bloody catastrophe down upon the entire cultivation world. Seeing his listener rapt with attention, Shimei continued eagerly. Perhaps he averted disaster by shattering his spiritual core, but too many things about him are suspicious. People are mistrustful by nature. Their first priority is to rid themselves of anything that could pose a threat to them. This little detour won't change the outcome. Then you think Tianyun Pavilion will still take Mo Run? Asked the man in white. Shimei smiled. Tianyun Pavilion is on our side, and everything's gone according to plan. Of course they'll take him. Once we have the shards of Mo Run's spiritual core, Taishanjun will be pliable again. With his strength, there's nothing we can't accomplish. The man in white hesitated. You've had control of him for close to a decade in the other world. What have you accomplished? Shimei froze, as if the man's directness had needled him. Frowning, he didn't respond for a long beat. What do you mean by this? He asked at last, eyes narrowed. Are you questioning me? No, I'm not, the man in white sighed. We have the same goal in mind. I'm afraid no one on Earth knows you better than I do. Shimei's expression thawed somewhat, but his beautiful eyes remained fixed on the man's face as if assessing the truth of his words. Pursing his thin lips, he said, It's good that you understand. Everything I've done is to take back what's ours. All of our sacrifices have been unavoidable. Of course. You're right. You do know me best, murmured Shimei. In these 2 lifetimes, I've lived every day on a knife's edge. There's truly no one I can trust aside from you. He paused. Don't let me down. Shimei's voice seemed to hover in the air like a butterfly after the words left his lips. A long, fraught silence passed before the man in white spoke once more. There's a question I've been meaning to ask you, he said, placid. What is it? Overhead, storm clouds rolled in around Mount Jiao. Leaves rustled on the slopes. The wind howled pitifully, like the wailing of 1,000 displaced, wandering souls. I want to know what you sacrificed for our goal in the past life. I want to know what you sacrificed for our goal in the past life. Tell me the truth. Although at this point I should be just pitching my voice up anyway. At this unexpected line of questioning, a furrow appeared between Shimei's brows. His eyes glinted. Didn't I tell you ages ago? A few innocent people had to die, but this is to be expected. Just think about what we've gone through, and then you'll... How many is a few? The man in white's soft yet determined voice cut through Shimei's answer, rendering him mute. His brows knit in a dark scowl, a look wholly uncharacteristic on his features. Shimei had always been mild and reserved, but it seemed he didn't care about baring his fangs in front of this man, as if his listener couldn't see the murderous intent on his face at all. A few is a few. Shall I make a registry of all the innocent dead so you can personally look it over? The man in white chuckled. Enough, he murmured. You know as well as I do that I won't be looking anything over anymore. Silence stretched between them. I've always done my best to help you, the man in white said. I've assisted you for years, ever since you found me and told me about the previous lifetime. When you concealed yourself within Gaywatch, I did everything you asked of me from Sishang Peak. Even when I felt confused and unsure, I knew your thoughts and goals were my own. For the sake of this mission of ours, I've long stopped caring whether I live or die. I never cared about sacrificing myself as long as we could succeed. I thought you were the same. Shimei surged to his feet and paced around the room. What do you mean by that? You say you stopped caring whether you live or die. Are you implying I'm a coward who'd do anything to keep my life? He shook out his sleeves, staring icily at the white-clothed man. If you knew what kind of person I am, you'd never imply anything of the sort. I do know, said the man in white. But I've been thinking, after you faked your death in the previous lifetime and stepped behind the scenes as Swabinan, you had 10 years to control the goo flower in Morun's heart. 8, Shimei corrected him. Later, Chu Wanning split his souls and pushed what remained inside Morun, thus giving him back some of his original nature. He was under my control for 8 years before he killed himself, not 10. Okay, 8 years then. In those 8 years, you intensified the hatred in his heart and goaded him into committing all sorts of atrocities, but he drifted further and further from our original plan. Why didn't you stop him then? Shimei laughed from sheer anger. Do you know how hard it is to create one flower of eightfold sorrows? A pause. I do. Do you know the enchantment would never work a second time on someone who's already had the curse uprooted? I do. Shimei wasn't smiling anymore. Fury flashed in his eyes. Then what are you trying to say? What would you have done if it were you? The man in white paused, then sighed. Haven't you decided for me? Shimei fell silent. I've never done those things or walked that path myself. I know I'd make the same choice if it were me in your place, but... Shimei narrowed his eyes, stalking down the stairs at the foot of the dais. He came to a stop before the man in white. But what? I still have guilt on my conscience. I'm too fucked up. There was a moment of dead silence. Then Shimei grabbed the stranger by the lapels. His incomparably beautiful hand, with that serpent ring coiled around his delicate thumb, was now fisted tightly in the stranger's robes as tendons bulged from his fair skin. Guilt on your conscience? What difference is there between you and me? Everything we've done thus far, did you not plot each and every move with me? Did you not perfectly understand what each entailed? What happened to all the ruthlessness you had back then? Yet now you feel guilt. Why? Every word came pushed through gritted teeth. Is it because Xu Shuanglin saw you as a friend, although you lied to him every step of the way? Do you feel guilt because you taught him a fake rebirth technique so he'd open this space-time gate for us? He never sold me out, the man in white whispered. Even until death. Just confirmation that that's what he would have said. Shimei blinked, confusion and anger swirling in his eyes. Very well. I did wonder what had you so worked up. What else? You saw those thousands of pawns and felt pity for them. You blame yourself? The man in white remained calm in the face of this outburst. Did you never blame yourself? Not even a little? You. Chimay ground his teeth, madness and derision flashing in his gaze. He stared at the man before him for a very long time, as if gazing upon a colossal disappointment or a sickening traitor. Then, as if a truly cruel thought had come to mind, he burst out laughing. He unsheathed his venomous claws and drove them into the man's flesh. Very well, very well. You've said so many pretty words, what with all your guilt and self-blame, but in the end it's something else you're really upset about, isn't it? The glint in Chimay's eyes brightened at the sight of the man's brows furrowing in confusion, like a vulture wheeling in the sky, hovering as he waited for his prey's final rattling breath before swooping down to dine. Coming to interrogate me like this, you believe you feel remorse after seeing all those Genlong pawns at work. You believe you feel regret after watching Shu Shuanglin die, but I know you. I know your heart better than anyone. Guilt and self-blame don't exist in you. You and I are equally cold and unfeeling. That vulture's wings cast the long shadow of death, beating down lower and darker. You feel no remorse at all. Stop fooling yourself. He smiled once more, proud and composed. Ximing Jing was always at his most grateful and poised when holding someone else by the throat. If you ask me, he said slowly, what you really mourn is the loss of your eyes. This seems a fitting time to show you the art. What with the blindfold and all. So, the blinding was real. Sort of. The fact that he was blinded, or one of them anyway, was real. He blinded himself in the... I need more information. Which is funny, because we're getting so much information, but I need more, please. Chimay whipped out the dagger at his waist. Using the hilt, he raised the hood of the man's white cloak until it fell back onto the man's shoulders. Beneath that fur-trimmed hood was a face of astonishing beauty, its exquisite features elegant beyond compare, if he does say so himself. Face to face, the two men were identical, save that the white-cloaked Chimay's eyes were obscured by a white ribbon, a few tendrils of dark hair falling before it. Chimay stared at the man, now stripped of his hood, and scoffed. Ximing Jing, take a good look at yourself. You only grieve that you've sacrificed more than I have. The situation on Mount Jiao was critical. To distract Chu Wanning, we had to use the last resort we discussed. With so many people watching, we couldn't just put on an act. If you were blinded while I was unharmed. You're jealous. What kind of projection is it? Or it's not even really projection. But there's a, is it pot kettle if they're both a pot? You know what I mean? If I were jealous, I wouldn't have agreed to the plan in the first place. I wouldn't have prepared to sacrifice myself in the worst case. It doesn't matter which one of us survives to finish this, as long as one of us does. Why would I... Before he could finish, the other Chimay cut him off with a sharp, "Who's there?" The dagger in his hand flew out, burying itself in a stone pillar. Chimay turned, voice cold. "Come out." Huang Shaoyue emerged from behind the pillar, looking much worse for wear. He'd betrayed, all the other cultivators on Mount Jiao in search of Ru Feng's legendary hidden treasure chamber. Unfortunately, he triggered a mechanism and ended up locking his entire party inside the chamber. The treasure trove of Ru Feng's sect contained all sorts of precious artifacts, sword manuals, and secret records, but it contained no food. All of Jiangdong Hall had become trapped inside. A bloody slaughter ensued, the strong quickly overpowering the weak. The sect members had consumed each other until only Huang Xiaoyue remained. Sometime after he'd eaten his very last disciple, Huang Xiaoyue at last struggled his way out of the chamber, only to stumble upon this freakish tableau. What was this? Two Shiming Jings? Huang Xiaoyue hadn't the faintest idea what he was looking at. The outside limit of his imagination was to assume they were twins. It would never occur to him that these were two Shimeis from different worlds united by the space-time gate. The longer he listened to their conversation, the more alarmed he grew. Huang Xiaoyue had always been sly and calculating. He saw almost immediately that he needed to escape, yet Shimei had managed to catch him. Shimei leveled him with a glare. I was wondering who could have snuck in here. Looks like it's just an old rat. His gaze drifted down, registering the blood on Huang Xiaoyue's robes. Blood? There are no animals on Mount Jiao. Where did all this blood come from? He paused, comprehension dawning. Human blood. Every syllable dripped derision. Sensing danger, Huang Xiaoyue whirled to run. Where do you think you're going? Like a hawk, Shimei soared through the air in a flutter of green robes and landed gracefully before Huang Xiaoyue. Those eyes as beautiful as misty rain looked up with a gaze cold enough to turn that mist to ice. You must not know how I hate cannibals, old geezer. They were the last words Huang Xiaoyue ever heard. The stench of blood filled the hall. Shimei watched as Huang Xiaoyue collapsed, scarlet spurting from a fresh hole in his chest. Frowning in distaste, he wiped the blood from his hand. Disgusting. He turned and stared for a beat at the other Shimei, then softened his tone. See that? Over these 2 lifetimes, there have been no shortage of beasts like Huang Xiaoyue in the cultivation world. The cards are due to be reshuffled. Don't overthink things. I told you I wouldn't let your sacrifices go to waste. Once our plan succeeds, I'll find a way to heal your eyes. No response came. Shimei rolled his eyes. Stop being so stubborn, he said dispassionately. Fine, have it your way. I promise I won't harm any more innocents if I can help it. Will that do? Are you happy now? Some of the tension finally melted from the white-cloaked Shimei's stance. His lips parted as if to respond, but his other self was too annoyed to hear more. He stalked out of the ancestral hall without looking back. That's the end of the chapter. Next time, we'll be on page 267 for chapter 266, which is called To Warm You Up. What in the entire fuck? We brought Huang Xiaoyue back for a page and a half just to kill him again. I applaud this move. Henry said, remember when you titled the stream, Let's Kill Huang? Indeed. Indeed I did. Very much so. And I wound up, I mean, technically right once, but, you know, effectively right twice. We thought he was dead. They're working together and have been. But our Shimei is not as bloodthirsty as Hua Binan. But really, Hua Binan just effectively killed a lot of people. Got a lot of people killed. And Shimei basically said, hey now, there won't be any of that in the future, right? That was a little over the line. I'm a little uncomfy now. And Hua Binan was like, oh, fine. Sure. I mean, I guess. If I can help it, you know. So, on one hand, Shimei less psychotic than Hua Binan, but still not great. Also, I need to know, when did Hua Binan find Shimei? When the fuck did that happen? This is the problem. She gives you a lot of information, and then that begets more questions. So it's this constant churning, dear fucking hell, meat bun, why are you doing this to me kind of situation. Liv said the 5 years maybe, and yeah, that 5-year gap may have been it. That would make sense. That's a good theory. Henry said, so does Hua Binan have a flower in him? Because that was my half-cocked theory. I don't know if we learned anything that forbids it, but it's still a pretty wild theory. That would be really fucking wicked if they did it, but I have no idea. Love asked, so we'll be finishing volume 8 next Tuesday. And we will indeed be hopping directly into volume 9 on that Thursday. So there's no break in that regard. And then we're going to go through all of volume 9. And then that will be it for reading streams, actually, until like February, until we come back with Erha. There kind of can't be like a book in the break like there was with Captive Prince, unfortunately. What with just my mandatory time off at the end of the year, I also have a big oral surgery thing that goes on hopefully in January. And so there's no point in starting to read something and then having to stop and all that jazz. It just kind of works out that way. That there won't be reading streams until the next time we pick up Erha. But that's the plan. We're going straight from 8 to 9. So there's no break this time. So I'll be back next Tuesday to finish volume 8. And then go directly into volume 9 on Thursday. I obviously love this series and I hate Meat Bun a whole fucking lot. And nothing about that has changed with this stream except for maybe the level of fervor I have in both my love for this series and my hatred for meat buns. So all in all, a good time was had by all. I'm going to go. Please have a lovely weekend. Please give the stream a like if you enjoyed it. Still feels like a weird word to use with Erha, but you know what I mean. And did I already say have a lovely weekend? I'll say it again just to make sure. Please have a lovely weekend. I'll see you on Tuesday. There are the streams before these reading streams where we talk about what we read. So on Tuesday at 2:15, we'll be talking about what we read in this stream. And that is for patrons and YouTube members. Thank you so much. I'll see you on Tuesday. Please remember to take care of yourself. Have a lovely weekend. For the third time, now you have to do it.